I feel like if there's one song that I hear a ton on satellite radio listening to 90s on 9, it's Duran Duran's Ordinary World. It spelled a comeback for the group who, up until this point, was largely synonymous with the early 80s. But by the beginning of the 90s, the members fell on hard times, both financially and personally. Even their own record label had little faith that they were going to deliver the goods. But they did. The end result was one of the most enduring songs of the decade. In today's video, let's talk about Duran Duran's comeback. In the early 80s, Duran Duran had nearly a dozen hits on the charts on the Billboard Hot 100, many of which became top 10 hits, thanks to the success of their first three records, their 1981 self-titled record, 1982's Rio, and the following year, Seven and the Ragged Tiger. Duran Duran also became innovators when it came to music videos, being one of the first bands to tell memorable stories with their songs, and sometimes even in exotic locations. They also became international rock stars, but it started a rivalry between the members and ultimately became their undoing. By the mid-80s, the band was splitting at the seams, dealing with fame, infighting, management issues, girlfriends, and it resulted in the members splintering and spending less time with one another. These tensions resulted in the recording sessions for their third record, Seven and the Ragged Tiger, taking 6 months. Musical clashes were to blame, and it wasn't surprising that after the album cycle was done, both Andy and John Taylor started their own supergroup, The Power Station, in late '84, teaming up with vocalist Robert Palmer, a harder departure from Duran Duran. The remaining members of Duran Duran, including Simon Le Bon, Nick Rhodes, and Roger Taylor, formed the group Arcadia, featuring high-profile guests like Sting, David Gilmour, and Grace Jones. After 6 months apart doing their own thing, the band shot a music video for their James Bond theme, A View to Kill. It was another hit for the band, but tensions were at an all-time high. Before the band recorded 1986's Notorious, both Andy and Roger Taylor left the group. While Notorious peaked at number 12 on the charts, their follow-up efforts, Big Thing and Liberty, were commercial disappointments. Liberty stalled at number 46 on the US charts. The band felt like they were destined to be synonymous with the early 80s era of music, and they started second-guessing themselves. Despite this, Le Bon admitted that Liberty actually contained several of his favorite Duran Duran songs, and he also added that the band lacked focus during the making of the record, adding, "There were times when everyone in the band felt like giving up. Things got so dire for the band that the members were low on money. Le Bon was having his credit cards decline, Nick Rhodes was millions of pounds in debt, and John Taylor, who was going through his own mental health issues, had to sell his house. Things got so dire for the band that around the time that Liberty came out, the band couldn't even get tickets to the MTV Video Music Awards, which was funny considering just a decade prior they were darlings of the network. Some critics who long derided the band as being teeny boppers, corruptors of new wave artistry, and a cheapened version of Roxy Music were, of course, overjoyed with the band's change in fortunes. Taylor remarked, "The experience all of us had gone through, the 5 or 6 years of success, then suddenly to have this all taken away and everybody saying your career is over, it was an enormous, disheartening period. We were practically broke." In several interviews the band gave in the early 90s, they talked about actually making their name one word and even considered moving to Athens, Georgia to have their music taken more seriously. It also didn't help that their record label didn't have much faith in them. They didn't get dropped, but their label offered them less money to record their 7th studio album, and it came with more restrictions. But one good thing that came out of the sessions for Liberty was guitarist Warren Cucurullo. John Taylor admitted, "That was our first step towards the 90s. We realized writing with a guitarist was very favorable to our music. That's why with him on board, we moved back towards stronger melodies, harmonies, and arrangements. The songs are more finely crafted." Since the band were on a tighter budget, they didn't spend much time in expensive studios like before. Instead, they retreated to Cucurullo's home studio in Battersea, England. He was hungry to prove himself, and he brought a different outlook to the band. John Taylor told recording musicians, "On our previous album, we had a fully working band for the first time in years. So we had really most of the songs written and arranged in advance, but there was a couple of albums before that which we had written in very expensive studios, so we didn't have to keep looking at the clock." The band also ditched their roadies, their publicists, their managers, and it was just the musicians themselves. For this album, the group's guitarist suggested more acoustic songs, suggesting that maybe perhaps their past two albums were light on those, and because of that, MTV didn't play them a whole lot. You have to remember this was when MTV Unplugged was super popular. Duran Duran even played K-Rock's Almost Acoustic Christmas benefit show in December of '92, with LeBon remarking, "You've heard of MTV Unplugged, this is Duran Duran Unplugged." One of the songs that was born out of these sessions was a track that ended up turning the band's fortunes around and became one of the most memorable tracks of the '90s, Ordinary World. LeBon had lost a close friend of his, David Miles, to a drug overdose in 1986. LeBon hadn't really talked in the press about his close friend for about a decade. It was clear that the frontman blamed himself for what happened. Maybe he could have prevented it, he thought. LeBon didn't want to live with the sadness and grief anymore, longing for a time where he just felt ordinary. Ordinary World addresses the themes of grief and resilience. Ordinary World became part of a trilogy that LeBon wrote about his friend, with the other two including 1989's Do You Believe in Shame and 1997's Out of My Mind. He recalled to recording musician how he wanted the song's title to be included in the lyrics, and that the demo they first cut actually started with the chorus, with him adding, "Nick Rhodes was playing the chords, Warren picked them up, and then we kind of altered them a little bit, and within minutes I had the melody." It was very, very quick. He also revealed to Pace magazine that one of the later lyrics in the song was inspired by the 1991 Gulf War. Once the band had a rough outline of the song, they showed it to their label, who was pretty excited about what the band had come up with and gave them more money to continue the recording process. But I won't cry for yesterday. There's another day. To put the finishing touches on the track, the band headed to London's Mason Rouge Studios, where drummer Steve Ferrone added drums and Nick Rhodes polished up the keyboards and added strings. The result was a track that showcased Duran Duran's artistic evolution, blending delicate acoustic guitar work with grand orchestral arrangements and rich synthesizer textures to create the most refined musical statement yet. Ordinary World was originally slated to be released as a single in 1993, but then something unexpected happened. Despite the label having a favorable reaction to the music that the band had come up with, they really weren't putting a big promotional punch behind it. In August of 1992, a Tampa Bay radio station received a cease and desist letter from the band's label after they leaked the track. But the audience ate it up, and DJs at the station were swarmed with hundreds of listener calls on the day the song was played. Capitol, because of the reaction from the fans, moved the release of the single up to December of '92. The song ended up peaking at number 2 on the Modern Rock Tracks chart and went to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was a massive hit across multiple radio formats, even before MTV had a video in their hands. Duran Duran's upcoming record was rumored to be called Here Comes the Band or Four on the Floor, eventually became known as the Wedding Album or their second self-titled record. The album consisted of photos from the band members' parents' own wedding. It was the idea of Nick Rhodes, who told the Birmingham Post-Herald that he was visiting his parents one weekend, came across their wedding photos, and kind of wondered if the other members still had photos of their parents at their weddings as well. After collecting the other members' parents' wedding photos, he sent it off to the band's artist without telling him what the name of the album was. So when they received the finished album artwork, the artist put the collage of wedding photos together on the cover and put the band's name in the center of the record. The band liked it so much, their 7th album became self-titled. Given the band's resurgence, there was all this talk in the press about 80s nostalgia coming back, and even Duran Duran was interviewed about it. One article talked about how people who supported Governor Clinton in the 1992 presidential race were also nostalgic for the times of Ronald Reagan in the 80s. The same article discussed how on college campuses, some of the most popular movie nights were those that played Flashdance, Footloose, and The Breakfast Club. LeBon was interviewed in the article and added, "We've got a lot more to say now than we did in the 80s, possibly foreshadowing the band's future success." In a good sign, the British newspaper The Independent called Ordinary World a classic transcendent beauty. That was really the first time that serious journalists in their home country had actually praised the band, and according to some of the members, they even saved that newspaper clipping. The success of Ordinary World resulted in their forthcoming album peaking at number 7 on the Hot 100 chart, and it was certified platinum. It gave the band their 4th top 10 album and produced another hit in Come Undone, which peaked at number 7 on the Hot 100 chart and number 12 on the alternative airplay chart. They had another hit in Too Much Information, which peaked at number 45 on the Hot 100. John Taylor remarked how a decade after taking over the musical world, the band was witnessing so many changes in the business, telling a newspaper, "We were recently doing promo gigs on Arsenio Hall, and we were on with Naughty by Nature, and I was thinking, wow, we've never been on TV with hip-hop acts." The song reached a new audience when it was covered by various artists in subsequent years. Electronic dance duo Aurora covered Ordinary World in 2000. Their version peaked at number 37 on the Billboard Dance Club Songs chart. Later on, American Idol contestant and Queen frontman Adam Lambert covered the song for his 2023 album High Drama, and he released it as the album's lead single, but it did not chart. LeBon years later recounted to Pace magazine about the song, "I'm not a big believer in the supernatural, but 6 years after my friend's death, I started to feel a weight inside me. Ordinary World was the act of letting that go." That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again in Rock Roll True Stories. Take care.